Okay, somebody explain the understanding judgments and the categories in 100 words or less. I don't, when he used the word syllogism, I guess one thing I was a little confused. When I think of syllogisms, I think of like classical syllogisms, where you've like Aristotelian syllogisms. But then when he's talking about uh like disjunctive syllogism and stuff like that, I mean, we have logical forms like that today. So is syllogism, is it just a general term for a logical argument is for him? That's what Eric's nodding? Yeah. So it's not necessarily an Aristotelian syllogism I mean, if you look at Aristotle's logic, there's a systematic, I don't even, there's just a whole bunch of different types of syllogisms, and they actually have these different names and all that kind of stuff. But he's not talking about that, is he? Or is he? He is?
Yeah. The
Okay.
kinds of judgments that can be formed through compounds of judgments, inference, right? Proposition. With this combination, we can actually spit out a third proposition. Hence
Okay.
syllogism, right? It's not very far removed from Aristotle. I mean, right, someone in the group is very keen to point out that the formal logic, general logic did not change much from Aristotle until another thinker shortly after Kant.
I have a question, if someone could help me. What's the difference between particular and singular in page 124, on page 124? The first table that he makes, which is about the functions of judgment. He talks about the universal, particular, and singular.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if this is the, set up here, but, I've heard it before explained as, or maybe I read it, or I don't know. I think the difference is like universal, right? Obvious, totalizing. Particular, all men. Men, the race of men. Let's say we're, it's like, there's a group of categories that exist in a set. Universal would be the whole set. Particular would be one of the categories, and then singular would be one of the things within one of the individual members of that category, like like a single person in the race of men, which would be the particular species that is in the universe, the material universe of all various species of forms of organic life. The world of organic life being the universal, I guess, and then the species human being the. You see what I'm saying? It's just that sort of tier thing. That's at least as far as I understood it. But maybe I'm off base.
If the universal was, because I'm assuming this kind of scales up and down. If the universal was humanity, then
yeah, then what would the particular be? That's the question, right?
Yeah, and what I guess I'm like with if the universal is humanity, maybe this is what Luis is confused about too. I don't know. I'm having a hard time thinking what's the difference between the particular and the singular. I mean, it's like I think of like as a particular. I don't know. I'm just confused. Like there's Hunter, and there's Ed. Are those the particulars, or are those singulars?
Oh, I see. I like Chase's distinction in the chat that the universal all, some, this one, like
But what would be the basis for lumping things into the particular?
well, there are a lot of I feel like there are a lot of um places where judgment is applied, or judgment, does its job, right? The understanding does its job and applies judgment in this function here, right? When talking about quantity all the time, right? So like some kinds of granite countertops are garish and disgusting. Not all of them, so I'm being particular. But I'm not being singular. You know what I mean? Like I just think that, you know what I mean? Because I like if Chase is right on this sort of mode of thing, which I buy. I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
It just seems odd to, I mean, I honestly don't know. So Chase could be completely right. I see it seems odd to me to associate the word particular because maybe I'm thinking of particular and singular too much as synonyms. Maybe that's my problem. But I think of particular as like a particular. But then maybe that's the word for singular.
Yeah. The particular is more, think of it as like partitive. It's part.
Oh, okay,
part
yeah,
of.
yeah. Makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, partitive.
Yeah, so I think the kind of class-based sort of distribution that Hunter was talking about, I think those would be universal. You say something like, so
Well,
if I say like all cats are mammals, even though you can see that as in a sense a particular category, cats, but that's still, I think, a universal judgment about them.
about that.
Yeah. And then some cats are gray, particular this
Yeah,
cat.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Eric has a nice example there in the chat. But so is it are these things I mean I tend to want to think of it in terms of like genre and species. So like you have like animals is universal and then you've got mammals and reptiles and stuff, but then you've got mammals you can treat as universal and you've got different kinds of I mean, is that the way it works? I can't Hunter, if you're talking, I can't hear you. Oh.
Sorry, yeah, I think so. Yeah, like based on Chase's example, that like all cats are mammals. Like I wasn't thinking about it, I think, thoroughly enough, but that's right. Like in my when I was first talking about it, but like yeah, like there's universal judgments being made about I think all kinds of I don't know what I guess the only word that comes to mind is categories or concepts. Concepts like mammal. All kinds of there's that uh the function, the logical function of the understanding and judgment can be applied in all these ways, and found to be operant, I think, in like these concepts.
And these are meant to be exhaustive of the forms of judgment that we would make, the pure forms of judgment we would make in terms of quantities, right?
Yeah.
How many umbrellas are left behind in the office at Texas State Philosophy Department, right? What is an umbrella? What fits into the class of umbrella, right? You might have to answer some questions about, what constitutes umbrellaness universally, right? We can also say something about Hanks's singular umbrella, as a quantity, right? It's all boiling down to quantity. The forms of judgment one can make that boil down to quantizing.
So you can make a universal judgment about cats, but you could also make if you're talking about all cats, but then you could also make a particular judgment in treating cats as a part of a larger genre. Okay.
Yes, I think that would be something like some mammals are cats.
Oh.
So that would be,
That'd be particular.
yeah.
Right, right. And this is him just kind of giving a little bit of a logical. He's visiting the forms of general logic inherited from primarily Aristotle, but the logicians of his day. There was a logician that was the textbook, textbook logician that he's kind of working from and critiquing a little bit as he's moving from this general structure of logic as I've inherited it to, and now I'm going to apply it to a transcendental critique, right? So the first table is really just to set you up for the second table of categories. The first table of judgments, the forms of judgment, is meant to
functions. It's called he called them functions. Yeah.
right. So this is something he more or less has kind of inherited, but it's systematized in this way so that you can see how it, how logical.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not gonna say intuitive yet, but you know what I mean? How much the table of categories seems to make sense in light of this.
Yeah. This would be all a priori, sort of a priori categories.
Right. Ways we need to have ways to judge before we can even judge.
Yeah. That's why it's
know?
transcendental. He calls it transcendental logic because these forms are a priori.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. At the beginning, I was having problems understanding between general and transcendental logic, but if we consider these tables are as a priori categories, then it makes sense that this is transcendental. Yeah.
I also have a question. Wonder if some can explain a little bit more. I think I need a little bit more clarification, maybe some had examples because they're effective. But I need to, I guess, really understand the difference between manifold and content. I mean, I understand there is a difference, but I'm thinking more as manifold to be like just raw, what's empirically given through senses, and then the content is after, like what manifold is transformed into after the synthesis. But I don't know, it was a bit confusing for me.
Where does he say that? In what page?
So it's in a few pages in the second section that it's actually section 3. So in the second part of the reading, when it starts talking about the categories.
Yeah.
So it starts talking about in page 130 and page 131.
Oh yeah.
Yes, so when it starts talking about synthesis in the second section of B103, and then it's pretty much throughout the whole page until B105.
Yeah, the way I understood that is that is what I mean, you see different objects and you like umbrellas, like the example that Eric gave. You see different objects and then you put them under one concept, which would be the one cognition he mentions there. So there's a manifoldness of umbrellas, but then you cognize them as one. I think that's how I understood that. I don't know if I'm right. Maybe surely Eric could chime in.
So this time reading it, it occurred to me that one maybe for those who've read Being in Time, right, that the unity of the manifold would be the worldliness of the world, right? It's all that out there, And then Heidegger makes a point of it being singular, right? It's not worlds, it's not a fragmented thing. It's a world within which we might circumscribe our vision to pick out objects. But first, we pick out objects from a manifold, a world, right? I mean, like it's all of the spatio-temporal intuitions, right? All of them taken together at once.
And the content is more like organized already.
Well, yeah, I want to say that the matter comes in as well, and it's what we intuit, but it's not purely formal. But the matter that we intuit is it's not going to yield any objects until we have concepts.
Before in analysis or presentations.
One thing I found confusing, in that same section Carmen was looking at, was when he talks about, when he's talking about synthesis. Synthesis of them, this is the middle of the paragraph, starts off by synthesis. I mean, rather, synthesis of a manifold, whether this manifold is given empirically or a priori, is what first gives rise to a cognition. And I was surprised to see him associate. I always thought of manifold as like sensory manifold. So, like sensory data. But then he says, but also a priori. And then here, I can't remember if it's before or after this, he associates this a priori manifold with space and time. And I don't understand in what sense space and time are a manifold.
Well, I thought it was the that like I took that manifold to mean like well, when you say like Nevin, I would go one step further than what you wrote in the chat. When you said I think of manifold as related to the matter of a cognition and a category is related, I would say that I thought of manifold, maybe I'm incorrect in thinking this, but I thought of manifold as like the diverse content of something. And that would include, okay, so in this case, the manifold, the a priori manifold in question would be everything we talked about in the transcendental aesthetic, all of it. You know what I mean? The space-time and the synthetic a priori I guess operate like what yeah. That I think that whole and that's what I thought of as just basically the manifold, the content of, right? I mean, but maybe I'm falsely equating those.
So I think the manifold is okay, at least this is how I'm currently understanding it, is that the manifold is connected with this idea of a synthesis where you're basically taking kind of a diverse quantity of particulars and you're kind of taking those and unifying them in some way, synthesizing them. So you get, you've got certain sensory impressions. They have this sort of diversity to them, but they can be grasped as, in a kind of more unified manner as, spatial and especially I think spatial as a manifold. So the manifold is kind of like a plane where it folds into itself the many different particulars into one plane, or at least one kind of full representation that can give you, this is space. Or he seems to, though, talk about it as, I think it's more than just space and time are manifolds. At least that's what I think he was saying. And actually, maybe I'm wrong about that.
because I know he talks mainly about the manifold of pure intuition, space and time. So that's at least what I take that as. And but he says that I think one of the key points he's trying to get is that, this is part of that organizing activity of the formal aspect of unification, but that, you've got this kind of mere receptivity of intuition, but that still kind of presupposes the work of these other faculties. So you've got the imagination that's still going to synthesize that original apprehension of sensory data into a manifold of space. And then also you need the understanding to also help with that synthetic unity through categories and whatnot. So I think that's why he's bringing it up here in this section. At least that's my way of trying to explain it. Hopefully that made some sense.
This may not be, I don't think this is much different from what Chase just said, but this is from that Kant dictionary, which somebody said they didn't like at all, but this is under the definition of manifold. Manifolds can be either empirical manifolds of sensibility or a priori manifolds of space and time, but in both cases, they issue from the receptive capacity of the mind, the conditions under which alone it can receive representations of objects. Yet this poses the problem of how the synthesis of two heterogeneous capacities, the spontaneous unity and the receptive manifold, may be accomplished. What is required is a special act of synthesis of the manifold, one which would combine the manifold with the modes of transcendental unity represented by the categories. So prior to this, I just kind of my vague. I thought of the manifold of sensibility as something like raw sensory data prior to being organized into any cognizable objects. Is that?
Well, it's already organized spatially and temporally, but it is not yet organized into cognizable objects.
Yeah.
Right, because in order to have any kind of experience, it's got to already be in the forms of space and time.
Right. So like the pure manifold of space would be the totality of the up, down, left, right spatial relations I take in as a whole, from which my thinking can then pick out objects.
I'm still struggling with that manifold. And I mean, I think I get at least a general sense of the empirical manifold of sensibility, but the a priori manifold of space and time. And he says, at least in this dictionary, in both cases, they issue from the receptive capacity of the mind. So I mean, I was thinking of space and time as being not part of the receptivity, because I thought that space and time were transcendental conditions for the possibility of experience, and so that they were part of what cognition gives to experience rather than receives from. But so I guess I'm confused there.
They're forms of sensibility.
Yeah.
They're forms of what?
Forms of sensibility.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think space and time, they would be then the forms of sensibility. Those are the forms of receptivity. Of
Right.
Okay.
The way that an object can be represented, it can only do so because we have these forms of space and time as forms within our mind that can receive such a representation. But I think Okay, I think there is something confusing though about uh maybe this isn't Kant's fault and this is just my own, but um so you've got this kind of like matter form distinction going on. So he'll talk about space and time as forms, although form is usually given the kind of like active role in Kant and as well as the whole kind of hylomorphic uh sort of Aristotelian tradition of active form and then passive matter. So it's kind of confusing because it seems like space and time, so they're indeed forms of receptivity,
Yeah.
but form itself is a kind of active ordering thing for Kant and in philosophy in general, probably. So uh I think that's why it's kind of confusing about like, well, is it active or receptive? I don't know. And then also the fact that it is uh you've got these other faculties sort of seemingly that he wants to say those do the active work, the understanding in particular. But the imagination too are these active faculties that are kind of working with the matter of space and time, intuition, sensibility. I don't know. Eric, did I get that wrong or I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is a little bit of a tricky fine point, right? I mean, it's it's a feature of our subjectivity, our finitude and our subjectivity not being God, that we can only intuit spatially or temporally. It's easy to fall into a kind of, the mind is actively temporalizing and spatializing everything first, or, right, we have spatiality and temporality as conditions that must be met for us to intuit. I feel like it's almost the same thing, just with a slightly different stress or accent, emphasis on the movement, if you like.
So when Chase was emphasizing the space and time are the forms, so of sensibility, would it be right then to say that that empirical sensibility is passive unambiguously because that's given to us, the just empirical sensibility, but then that only ever is experienceable by us insofar as it is conditioned by space and time, the forms of sensibility, so that space and time are a priori in this. I mean, the way I think, which I guess is kind of cartoonish, and it's also not, it doesn't happen as temporal sequence, but the kind of the cartoon way I think about it is you have this empirical sensory manifold that impinges on awareness, and then space and time, we can't experience that unless space and time give form to it, temporal and spatial form to it. And so space and time are a priori in that they're again, a way I think they're kind of like waiting there to catch, as it were, this data that does not originate with us, but space and time do kind of originate with us, but they're so space and time don't come in, as it were, with sensibility. But our experience, yeah, I think, yeah.
Right. When we're talking about how things are given, right? This is how, right? Things are given either spatially or temporally, or they're not given. You know what I mean? Because of the kind of creatures we are.
But that givenness is, what I want to say is that givenness, the spatial and temporal, like you said, they are features of transcendental subjectivity, correct?
Right, that's right.
So the space and time are not part of the raw, as it were, sensory data. They're part of the transcendental subjectivity that conditions. I mean, I realize I'm talking nonsense because there's no possibility of experiencing anything that is not conditioned by space and time. So I'm making a distinction that's really not there. But I'm sort of imagining that you could somehow separate forms of intuition from the actual matter of intuition when in fact you can't, because the matter only ever appears to us as formed by space and time. We cannot have any empirical sensory experience except as it is formed by space and time, right?
Right.
I think I'll stop now. Think I'm generating more confusion than clarity.
I had a question right on the very next page at A79. No, sorry, B105. When he says various presentations, so the function that gives unity to the various presentations in a judgment also gives unity to the mere synthesis of various presentations in an intuition. I just wanted to see if y'all could help me clarify what it means by various presentations. Whether it means various presentations of the same object or various presentations like the various presentations in a manifold that become unified through a synthesis.
I think you have to understand presentation as he explained as the translator explained it at the beginning of the book. It's a representation in your mind.
Right, right. So that's what I'm saying. Does he mean various presentations of the same object or various presentations of many objects? So the objects in a manifold, or yeah, the intuitions that
Well, maybe
in a
it is your
manifold.
mind that receives the manifold of empirical sensations and transform that, and you decide whether that's one object or concept or not. Like in the example that Eric gave, you decide whether that's an umbrella or a parasol.
Yeah, no, so more so what I mean is, does he mean that the various presentations, for example, of a single book? So this is one presentation, here's another one, here's another one, here's
Ah, okay. Well,
is
yeah.
that what he means, or does he mean various presentations of a room, for example, and all the stuff there that then gets unified?
I like the first one, the different faces of a book, because then you make a judgment, right? This image, this image, this image, all constitute the same book, or all representative of the same book. So now you're forming a judgment. But in order for you to form that judgment, there must have been a unity underlying that for you to make that judgment. And then the unity that underlies that judgment, he is saying, is the same unity that precedes any judgments, or any operations of the understanding. It's the full unity of the synthetic manifold, or this full synthetic unity of the manifold.
Yeah, so it's the same function in a judgment that would give unity through by subsuming different representations under a unified concept. All cats are mammals, or yeah, that's right. Okay. Sorry I keep clearing my throat. I'm not being pretentious. It's really my throat is, yeah. Okay, so you've got that judgment, this kind of logical function, and he's saying the same thing is going on. The same function is also giving unity to the mere synthesis of different representations or presentations in an intuition.
So I think that's where he's talking about. Okay, so judgment, that's going to be the understanding, thinking through concepts. Saying the same thing is going on in giving also. Say we can have different intuitive presentations of something, some sensible object, but they're given this conceptual unity through the understanding's judgment of using these concepts. So these concepts are always kind of already involved in shaping the sensible intuitions, different ones, into a unity that corresponds with that concept. That probably sounded like nonsensical, but it made sense in my mind. I don't know.
I think I get what you mean. I think so like with the book example, you get all the different presentations of it, and these are the intuitions, and you understand that it's from this one object, but then you can make judgments like, oh, this book was written by Heidegger, it's like so long, and again, all these concepts are unified, or these judgments are unified
Wouldn't,
to the same object.
well, wouldn't it be the similar act just for like the various sides of the object, for the very fact that I'm thinking, or anybody's thinking as I turn this object around, that all the things that just you saw just now, those are all one object, instead of me somehow conjuring 70,000 different objects as I showed you all of its sides, right? The very fact that the very presumption that all these sides I see of this my phone, my cell phone, these sides that I see all belong to the same cell phone, or this object, they all belong to the same object. That's a like an already unified thing.
Yeah, but but I mean, but okay, so I see the thing has sides and I see the book from different angles. That doesn't mean I know anything about the book. I know the external visual, what I'm getting because I'm sighted, but that doesn't mean I have any sense of the book. It's a book, but that's rather limited.
But I mean, I'm guessing that there were confusing empirical concepts with the categories of the understanding. So if you look at the categories, they're really, really super general. For example, I mean, some of the ones I find easiest to understand are of relation, like substance and cause and effect and that sort of thing. And so there's not a category of the understanding for book or for cat or for tree. There's a category for, and this may not be talking correctly, but something like there's a category for substance. And so that category is what makes it possible for me to synthesize all this stuff into a thing, an entity that appears to have substantial character to it. And so my understanding is that the categories of the understanding they're not like the concept of book, because I can cognize the book. I mean, concept, I can think about the idea of book, about the definition of book, but these categories are transcendental, meaning they're working in the background. They are what make it possible for me to actually have experience of a thing, or of a thing and the way things interact through cause and effect. And I don't have to conceptually think of substance to cognize a substance. That category is already there a priori, and is what makes it possible for me to experience things as substantial objects. And one thing that was important for me last week was that Eric was helping us draw this distinction between a judgment in, like, this phone is black, and if I remember right, Eric, correct me, but that judgments are at play merely in the process of experience itself. So the process of experiencing an object already involves a judgment, even if it never comes forth cognitively as a statement that I can say about. I mean, I might be able to do that, but the mere ability to experience an object as a substantial entity already involves judgment, and then therefore already has drawn in one of these categories that makes it possible for me to have an experience at all. Not merely to make, judgments that I could put into a syllogism, but simply be able to have an experience. Is that right?
I was curious whether or not in the previous section when we were going over like the aspects or functions of unity in forming judgments, if he's trying to extend this to objects with the concept of synthesis that he's presenting.
Yeah, it'll be coming, right? He'll get more explicit on objects and how we know objects as such, but we're building it up.
Okay.
But yeah. So I mean, judgments are generally seen as kind of bringing things together, right? A concept and an intuition brought together, that's a basic form of judgment, right? But bringing two disparate things together. So there's always a kind of unity implied in a judgment. And all he's saying really is, yeah, the different sides understood as one thing, right? You've already made a judgment that that's one object, even though there are different intuitions, right? It's not the case that we like see a little patch of red and a little patch of orange and a little patch of yellow and a little patch of green, and it just doesn't make any sense to us. We start pretty soon to recognize we're looking at a rainbow. This is one object, it's many colors, but it's actually one object, right? So that's a judgment that even though you see 7 colors or however many colors, it really is just one phenomenon, right? There's a unity to it. That form of judgment, right? That is just a rainbow. He is saying, it's the same function, it's the same kind of unity that the subject has with regard to the world as such, right? The world is already unified as a world, the only world, right? It's not the case that, some section of my world, substance and accident have, in here and have these relationships and causality takes hold, and then some other part of my existence, causality doesn't take hold, right? We take the world to be a unified world and that things are consistent all throughout it. And that has to be the case before we can, right, start to take things apart within it.
And those kinds of judgments, just to repeat this because it was important for me, those kinds of judgments aren't explicit. I mean, it's not like I look at this object and I have to consciously think, well, let's see, there's a red streak and a yellow streak and a green streak, and then think, okay, so now I see these streaks, and so now I have to make the judgment that this is a rainbow. But the judgment is sort of already built into that recognition of the object.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that would, I mean, I maybe a little bit of a stretch here, but that form of thinking, like where we would have to laboriously piece together from little patches of sensory data, objects, with like a little flow chart or whatever, and rules for doing this, and, errors one might make along the way when forming objects, right? I want to say loosely, that's what it might look like if we didn't have categories, a priori categories already doing this, right? But because we have a priori categories that we already experience the world as an object world with, discrete objects.
Just as a side note, when Hume, in that book we looked at, he said, no, I'm sorry, it was in that excerpt from the chapter on personal identity. He says, I experience nothing but a bundle of perceptions. And I don't know if Kant ever directly referred to that statement, but what I imagine is Kant saying, come on, that's not true. You don't experience a bundle of perceptions, you experience a thing. So that's kind of like when you were describing, oh, this patch of color and that patch, we've got this bundle of perceptions. That's not what I don't experience a bundle of perceptions.
Personally, I experience a bundle of sensations.
Because of all those hallucinogens.
I was wondering where you're going with that. Yeah.
I thought it was going to be a tomato. The tomato.
Yeah, it was actually the tomato that retrospectively did it. Went back in time and messed everything up. Now I'm some kind of Humean tragedy. I don't know. Oh,
Sorry.
So it, I'm I'm not disagreeing because I'm not understanding most of this. So is is Kant inferring a priori understanding of objects, so that is the basis for us to be able to, no matter the different sides of a book, we can see it, and no matter how many multiple colors there are, we can understand it as a singular object because of, is this an a priori organization of what today we would call our brain, how our brain functions, or where I mean, because he's saying that we have these subjective understandings, correct? And that we really can't know a thing in itself, but yet we're able to get this massive sensory data and separate objects from objects and say, that's a book, that's a person holding the book, that's a person holding a book sitting on a chair at a desk. And we can say chair, desk, person, book, because of a priori understandings.
The categories, because these categories we can experience objects.
And the origin of these a priori categories.
What do you mean? Like what kind of origin are we looking for?
I'm not looking for any particular origin, but if we have subjective understandings of our environments, and it's only because of the a priori categories, is it something that's manifested in our thought processes, how we process information?
How we experience the world.
Okay, so these a priori categories come from how we experience the world.
They're conditions for experiencing the world.
Conditions?
Yeah. In the same way that space and time are the conditions, the forms for intuiting, right? These categories are the conditions for cognizing any object.
Okay.
Go back to my analogy last week of the eyeball. You know, if you've never seen your own eyeball, if you're in a reflection, if you've never seen any other eyeball, and you were looking at the world, you wouldn't be able to talk about rods and cones and stuff like that, but you know that there must be something in the organ of vision that allows you to see colors and differences, of lighting conditions and stuff like that. And so you could build, in a sense, a transcendental argument of the structure of the eye that would tell you what kinds of functions what kinds of functions the eye would have to perform in order to be able to give you a certain kind of visual experience. There's got to be something that deals with color, and something that deals with brightness, and something that allows you to focus on things. You may never come up with the idea of a lens or rods or cones or any of that, but you could give an explanation in the structure, the kinds of functions, maybe more than structures, the kinds of functions that the eye must be performing in order to provide this kind of visual experience. And I think Kant is doing something similar, except that he's doing it just for experience as such. And so, you know, when you say like, what's the origin? Well, I mean, I don't, since I can't see the eyeball, I can't really tell you what that thing is. I can't say, oh, that's an eyeball and it has rods and it has cones and this, because I can't see I can't see the organ of vision, but I can tell you what functions it must have. And I may not even be able to tell you how the eye got here, where it came from, what it's made of. I don't know. All I can do is tell you the way it works in order, or, you know, the functions it must have. And so I think of Kant as doing that kind of thing. He's like giving us the structure of the eyeball in Kant, or this, if you think of it, that Wittgenstein picture, you know, the eyeball that's behind the field of vision. If the eyeball is analogous, and I think Wittgenstein meant it that way, it's an analogy to consciousness, you can infer that the organ, if you will, of consciousness must have certain kinds of functions that provide a kind of structure and form to my experience. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to have this kind of experience. And among those structures are things like cause and effect, substance that I can experience things with substantial features. And so those are structural features in the right word, but they're structuring principles or structuring functions that must, in a sense, be behind the scenes in the organ of consciousness, but which is already making it a thing, which he doesn't want to do because you can't experience it as a thing. But it's just there's something back there, as it were, that is providing these functions.
Thank you very much.
I think that helps. I want to say maybe where the eye may serve as a kind of function, a good way of highlighting the aesthetic. And again, I'm no expert on this, but Chomsky's universal grammar might be a bit of an analogy for what we're doing here, because this is logic, right? What must logically be the case for us to form judgments? We must have some kind of logical apparatus already in order for us to make judgments. What is the bare logical apparatus that we must have for us to build any further logical apparatus? I don't know, maybe Joseph, think about this and tell me later, but maybe the table of categories, these categories are like the kernel of an operating system. No.
But
Okay.
isn't Kant, doesn't Kant, aren't sensory perceptions extraordinarily important to Kant's understanding of human understanding?
Sure.
Okay.
But
that would imply that there's something in between, so to speak, someone's a priori and the impressions that a person is receiving.
intuitions without concepts are blind. Concepts without intuition are empty.
Okay.
Experience is what happens when intuitions meet concepts.
He literally said that, right? Do you remember the page number of that?
You'll say it again, I promise.
Okay, so
He says it like 3 or 4 times.
He's going to remind us of that insight. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, actually, last week you quoted 2 sentences in the book, and the sentence that Eric just gave was the very next sentence. So,
just to be clear too, Eric, I can neither confirm nor deny your analogy because I don't have the base understanding of Kant to even say if that's inaccurate.
Yeah, and I'm not quite, I don't have the computer science background to know if that's accurate, but
I'm not there yet, man. I'm getting there slowly but surely.
yeah.
So
Yeah, but sorry, Mario, I apologize. I was gonna say I can't even comment on the Tractatus eyeball because I've read it 3 times and I'm still not 100% certain what it is, and it's probably the worst drawing of an eyeball I've ever seen, which totally checks out for Ludwig. So
and I'm taking a
It's not like he was a failed art student.
whoa, he went to class with him. Do you know that? Grade school. Yeah.
Not the same art class though, because otherwise he would have drawn the eye better.
Yeah.
Adolf could draw better eyes. Why can't you be more like your friend Adolf, Ludwig? He draws better eyes.
It's funny. I'm taking a course with Wittgenstein, Kant, and Nick Gargano this semester. So
You are braver than I, my friend.
it's gonna suck, dude. It's a tough class. Um, can we talk about whether this table's actually complete? He does seem to mention the ancients in section 12 at the end, and kind of acknowledges one true and good as possible additional categories. Um, so I don't know. Is I was kind of thinking about good. Uh, so in terms of value, I know he says like perfection. Um, but yeah, this it just kind of seems to me like that would be more of an existential dimension for objects. Like the value they have. And yeah, I didn't totally understand this section.
I mean, I don't want to get too dogmatic or dogged about it. I think there's a case to be made that we can see it as exhaustive in its broad outline. But as I was kind of indicating earlier, you might need to explode it from the inside.
I've heard people say that Kant borrowed in borrowing from Aristotle, he sort of accepted a particular structural formalism that may be a bit forced, but frankly I don't understand Aristotle's system well enough to know.
This structure that he uses: quantity, quality, relationality, modality. Here in our table of judgments, and then very quickly into our table of categories, moving from one to the next. He revisits that structure in the second critique. He revisits that structure in the third critique. So Kant seems to think that once we've covered the quantity, the quality, the relationality, and the modality, we've covered all of our logical bases.
And I'm out having a cigarette, so I left my textbook inside, but towards the end of this, he seems to very much emphasize that I am looking at the functional structure and methodology to form this, rather than an exhaustive list of what all the potentiality of this could be. So I think he leaves it very open in my reading that it's not exhaustive.
No, I think it has. I think based on my reading, right, that it actually like it kind of has to be exhaustive, right? Like the I mean, I don't know, because one of us is right here. But I guess yeah, right, yeah, that's right. And then per my, at least as far as I understood it, that there was this it seems like he's really interested in producing this like consistent systematic scientific or science and metaphysics, right? So in order to do so, there has to be a full inventory of the tools and conditions of what what Nevitt was referring to, that non-thing thing, the transcendental subjectivity, a full inventory of it. So it has to be exhaustive in that respect. However, what actually Joseph, I will say, he makes special mention of a lot of things that he could talk about here. I forget what exactly the content of this discussion he's in. I think like the 3/4 mark of this reading, but he's like, I'm not going to get into that. We could get all into this stuff, but I'm not gonna bother with that right now. I don't remember the content of that, but he did delay a more thorough investigation to parts of this, is all I'm saying. So I don't think that's a totally misplaced feeling.
That's right. I think in terms of the pure categories, he thinks he has an exhaustive list. In terms of any derivative concepts from these pure categories, he says this could go on and we could argue about it. It may not be to everybody's liking, and it's not germane to my point here, right? Like, I don't need to go through all the derivatives. I'm really talking about a transcendental account for the possibility of any experience of objects, right? We don't need to go down that path right now.
Yeah, didn't he say some of that he did in the metaphysics of nature?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And when he says the third category in each class arises by combining the first two, and then he says that this requires a special act of understanding. So they're not merely derivative. There's a distinct act of synthesis. Is he going to talk about this more later on? What this distinctive act of synthesis entails?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I assume it's kind of like related in some respect to like the antinomies, among other things.
No, most of these acts of synthesis are logical acts, and they're going to be covered here in the transcendental logic. Up to the schematisms, the chapter on the schematism is very much concerned with, again, how we bring intuitions and concepts together and make these synthetic a priori judgments. The antinomies will show up when we get to the transcendental dialectic, and he's less concerned with the synthetic form of judgments as such there.
One question, Eric. Does Kant ever talk about memory and oblivion, forgetfulness?
I don't want to. I want to. From my memory, I don't see any my memory. Sorry. I don't recall any sustained discussion of memory or especially oblivion. Well, there's a touch of oblivion in the sublime, and then memory is kind of alluded to in the operations of the imagination, but he doesn't get real systematic about any concept of memory as such. And I think maybe oblivion you can get closer with the sublime in the third critique.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the second synthesis that's to do with reproduction, that's pretty close to an account of memory, although it's not exactly. He's not explicit. So yeah, he doesn't explicitly give it a explanation of memory, but he does give an explanation of this certain synthesis by which past representations can be reproduced in the imagination. This is going to be a part of that synthesis. And that's so that's close to his account of memory.
There's a whole lot more syntheticity to come.
So one thing, to kind of somewhat go back to the question of completeness of the the table of categories and whatnot. So I was looking through this book earlier, Kant's Theory of Knowledge by, I'm not sure how you pronounce that name.
Hartnett.
Yeah, I believe he's German. Actually, Nevitt recommended this book, I believe, but I got it and read most of it. But so Hartnick makes a case that there are some things that are not that is not complete about what's going on with the judgments of logic and all that. And so one thing I thought was kind of interesting is that this is also sort of has to do with the whole like debate about um Euclidean geometry and non-Euclidean geometry and with the forms of intuition. But in this case, it's more with logic and these, pure concepts of the understanding. Where so Kant thought that the logic of his time, which was still it was Aristotelian syllogistic logic, that was complete. And since then we've had developments in logic, predicate logic, and even more recently there's aletheic logic and things like that. So it's kind of like the same sort of thing is going on where kind of suggesting these things are, they're complete. There's not really much to do in the development of it, like a substantial change that is possible in logic. It's kind of like it's done for the most part. And I think he seemed to think that also with geometry in terms of I think he thought like Euclidean geometry was basically that was the main substance of it. So I think there's that's Harnick makes the point that basically that's what's going on in terms of there's some things there's developments that seem to be left out that predicate logic kind of goes into um existential judgments. There's judgments that don't necessarily pertain to a subject predicate kind of relation. Certain like existential quantifiers and universal quantifiers, where if you take a predicate first order logic, truth functions, logical constants, I think you could possibly make the case, that you could maybe derive some things from Kant's categories in order to kind of have that go along with it. Although this Harnick he seems skeptical of that, at least in terms of existential judgments. And he also makes the case that why is there no conjunctive judgment? Is we got categorical, hypothetical, disjunctive. What about poor little conjunctive? I don't. Harnick is suggesting that Kant's desire to have three and only three kinds of judgment under each of the four forms. That's what he needed to have a system of categories work out neatly. So it's kind of maybe the form of wanting to have that numbered structure of the 3, 4, the 12. But then you could still probably possibly argue that conjunctive judgments or maybe some kind of derivative judgment of those other three something. But I don't
Yeah.
I mean, just off the top of my head, I would think he would. It depends on the types of judgments that are forming the conjunction, but he would probably call it a complex assertoric. You know, it's raining outside and that pisses me off, and I'm not taking this shit anymore. That's really just one complex assertion, isn't it?
But I'm just wondering if, from what Chase read from Hartnett, if a contemporary logician would look at classical syllogistic logic and say there are things that it cannot express that contemporary logic can express, and that may be an indication of some things that maybe Kant couldn't see because he wasn't aware of that.
For sure.
Maybe Joseph can enlighten us about this, because I think it has to do with both Boolean logic, these functions and, or, and so on.
I was thinking Tarski as well. Tarskian logic is not anticipated by Kant, but from my understanding as well, a lot of this Boolean and Tarski predicate logic is really the classical logic is the foundation. It's just another level of complication, a second order, right? It's like the difference between saying, I'm lying and I'm saying I'm lying, right? There's the statement, and then there's the statement of the statement. So it's a different order of a statement. So from my understanding, Tarski logic is built off of classical logic. It's just second order or a higher order.
Louise, I think, to quote Princess Pride, get used to disappointment if you're asking me to explain logic. So but what I do find interesting from the analytical tradition is that so much of how you interpret the symbols is dependent upon a philosophical ideology or tradition that you're employing, which is interesting to me, and worth a separate discussion that goes a little bit outside of Kant. I think it would derail this discussion, but like finite constructivism is essentially built on a Kantian concept of intuition, but then you could even go a step further to argue about how like the transcendental analytic in and of itself is linguistically nonsensical in a way, but that's a different discussion and a different level of which Wittgenstein that you're actually even like Tractatus or PI. So I couldn't tell you, basically.
Eric, do you mind if I bring up something you mentioned just a couple minutes ago? Beg your pardon, but you kind of did an impersonation of Howard Beale from Network. It's raining and I'm mad as hell and I'm going to take it anymore. Great, but I could say it's raining and I'm very happy because I've lived in a place that has had a drought for a year, so I'm not mad as hell. So I don't see saying it is raining and then I'm mad as hell being an extension that I am as mad as hell being an extension of the statement that it's raining.
Well, it's an assertoric. That it's not. I mean, it's not necessarily it's not an analytic statement. I think what you're thinking of, right, is like an analytic statement where just the base first thing will have this or really an apodictic. An apodictic, actually, is what you would be talking about, right? Where it's raining, therefore necessarily I must be pissed off because rain equals pissing people off. But that's not the case. It would be assertoric. That's what he talks about. These three kinds of he does it. Oh yeah, the modalities. Problematic as possible, assertoric as actual, apodictic as necessary. Problematic judgments, assertoric judgments, and apodictic judgments. So an apodictic judgment about the rain would be, it's raining, and therefore there's raindrops involved.
There's water in the air.
There's water going on. There's some water stuff happening, of some science stuff, that we all learned and now I don't remember. It's about, I remember it goes in a big cycle and it's magical and whatever. That's apodictic. But the assertoric, where I'm asserting something, it's actual, but not necessary. So on this particular occasion, it's like, it's raining. and it's fucking pissing me off. I wanted to go do something, and it's annoying me. Whereas some other times, catch me on a different day, and I make an assertoric statement. It's raining, and that's awesome. I get to stay inside, and nobody bothers me. And so that's. I feel like that's the order of like. I mean, again, I might be off.
I didn't realize, Eric, you were linking the three, can I say, types under the modality category.
Yeah, I was kind of just speaking to Chase's comment about what about conjunctives? Do conjunctives pose a problem? Which, I mean, maybe they do. Just my initial thought is, I'm not, from when they came, from the way Kant is setting that up, I don't know if conjunctives are actually a special case, not included.
Ah, okay. So you do think disjunctives can be linked?
Well, he sets up disjunctive as communal, which I think that makes sense too, right? They're necessarily related to one another. If we're going to say either or each of these clauses, after the either and after every or, form a community.
But they're mutually exclusive of one another. Whereas like in a conjunctive statement, that might not be the case. So
Right. One might be true and the rest of them are unaffected by the truth of the one. Whereas in a disjunctive, because it's a communal relation between all these judgments, if one is true, that's going to have an effect on the rest of them.
To use the example you gave, Eric, and that Hunter was talking about, it's difficult for me to pronounce these words under the modality. Number 4. What would be an example of problematic?
Oh, just a possibility. Just to state something is possible is to offer a problematic judgment.
Oh, okay. There's a 30% chance of rain.
It could rain.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just a technical term. Problematic, which means it's a judgment on in the form of judgment is possibility.
Okay. Thanks.
So I have a question about, okay, so Hunter's example made me think of this. So Hunter's example of the apodictic judgment was that the water is wet. So okay, so that's an analytic proposition or judgment, which made me think of what exactly are these what Kant is explaining here. He wants to explain these as synthetic, right? They're not just, but I'm wondering like where does the those analytic kind of propositions fit in here? Or is he just saying like, well, we're not dealing with that here. We're dealing with synthetic a priori judgments and whatnot. So I don't know. I'm not sure exactly where Kant and Hunter's example and where these synthetic judgments and analytic judgments exactly how they fit together necessarily. I don't know. Is so the apodictic, the necessary judgment, I remember he explained it as something like it's based on the rules of the understanding itself. So the form of the understanding is what gives it that necessity. Those forms are themselves a priori and therefore necessary and universal and apodictic. So but then if you think about, okay, what are the rules of the understanding? The things I think of are kind of they're analytic kind of ideas in the sense of, like a tautological identity kind of thing. Like rain is wet. So I'm not, yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud my confusion. So I don't know. Enjoy. Or if anybody could help clarify that, that'd be good too.
I mean, you could do the one all bodies are extended. That's not analytic, and it holds with necessity, right? All things are subject to causation. All bodies are subject to causation. All effects presuppose a cause. Well, I guess you could see that as analytic because by definition of effect, but a little more complicated, right?
Yeah. But he's really interested in those synthetic judgments in terms of these categories, right?
No, I want to say no, not exclusively. I'm don't tie me to it, but I want to say these categories apply for all judgments, analytic or synthetic. We're primarily concerned with synthetic judgments, but these categories apply for all judgments, analytic or synthetic.
I was thinking that he's trying to, again, spell out the conditions for the possibility of any kind of experience at all. And so then he looks and he says, well, if you look at the way we experience things in the world, there are these implicit judgments, and here's the full set of judgments that make it possible to have the full range of possible experiences. And then if you look at that set of judgments, those derive from these, or maybe it's the other way around, I don't know. But anyway, from these set of categories. So I thought of them as just, again, just the very general conditions for the possibility of any kind of experience, which would then, I guess, like Eric was saying, would then refer to all kinds of judgments, any kind of, or the full range of all possible judgments, through which we experience things in the world. Some of which would be analytic, some which would be synthetic, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Was there a question in there how we get apodictic necessity out of the first two moments, or is that clear?
I don't understand that. If you wanted to explain that.
Oh, so that's okay. That's so the third category is a combination of the first two being problematic and esoteric. Wait, say that word.
Assertoric.
Esoteric. Oh God, for some reason that does not sound right to me, but whatever. We're learning new words today, I guess. Okay. Yeah, I remember reading that, and the way he described it was a little made my brain feel kind of mushy a little with the whole, I think it had to do with the hypothetical syllogism where you're saying like one premise could be problematic. I think no wait, it's the yeah, hypothetical syllogism, I believe, is the one he's saying was apodictic, but the premises one would be problematic, and the other one would be esoteric torque. And so I'm not sure if
Yeah, that's one way of setting right. No, that I think if you follow out the whole material conditional, right? if this, then this, right? And if is a hypothetical statement, then this would be esoteric based on that hypothetical, right? If this, then this, but then follow this whole syllogism. If this, then this, therefore by necessity this. So we have all moments in that material conditional, right? The possible, the esoteric, and then by necessity. But I'm a little disappointed Hunter left because Hegel, I feel like Hegel makes it a little easier. You could see each of the third terms in these categories as a kind of alphabet of the first two. And this we can define necessity in terms of possibility and actuality. Right? For something to be necessary, it is impossible that it is not actual.
Yeah, good old double negative there. It's rather Hegelian.
That's why I was saying this section could be read as a prolegomena to the science of logic. A lot of the same movement.
Is that because, like, I know that, like, in our class, you talked about the sort of dialectical relationship between those triples?
That's right. Possibility, actuality, necessity, right? So unity, plurality, totality, right? And that, yeah, the first two, quantity and quality, doctrine of being, right? The first book of science of logic. The third and the fourth categories, the relational and the modality, all right there in the second book of the science of logic.
Maybe we should take a detour and just read the science of logic real quick.
We'll do that next week.
Okay,
Hey,
yeah.
shut the hell up, dude.
We'll do them.
Or maybe we should, well, we took two weeks for Hume. Maybe we should take 2 weeks for the science of logic.
God damn it. God damn it.
Maybe just save it for the end for dessert.
I feel like this should have an obvious, or that there's an obvious answer I've dismissed. But why is it so important to Kant that in each one of those triples, that the third one, did he use the word combination? It's like a combination of the first two, but it's also, it can't be reduced to the first two. So why is it so important that it can't be reduced to the first two? Because then you could just get rid of the third one. You could say, well, there's just the two, but why does he not want to do that? I mean, I guess maybe the answer is because he doesn't think you can.
Right. I think it's both at the same time, right? I think he genuinely sees totality or allness as not analytically derivable out of these, but you need something else, right? Really, I mean, what he's not yet saying, but what Hegel will say is that you need an operation of reason to come in and inspect the understanding. You need reason to come in and do a little regulating on the understanding to get this third, right? Whereas Kant is this is a very embryonic stage of that shape, right? And so he's really just trying to make the case that you can't straightforwardly get the third term out of the first two without kind of adding another ingredient of some sort. Otherwise, this would be a table of 8 categories instead of 12.
So if you look at something to which that third one applies, you would not be able to just reduce that to some I don't know, disjunction of the other two or something like that.
You know, that's a good question because I want to say you might be able to retroactively get the first two moments out of the third. But I would think he's trying to make the point you won't automatically get the third moment just from the first two.
Hmm. Oh, I don't know if Joseph is still there. When you're at, had been looking for this sentence. We're
Go
asking whether this was a complete set or not. This is right about A80, A80, bottom of page 131 of the Pluhar. For these functions of the understanding are completely exhaustive and survey its power entirely. So
Maybe
there's
I've been
where
wrong.
he explicitly says, this is it.
I think it was like towards the end of the last section. I'll go down and get my book.
Yeah. And elsewhere, I think he says he feels certain that this is exhaustive because he's got a principle
Yeah.
that governs the 12.
He
Okay.
derived it from one fundamental principle. But then, like Eric and up here were saying, there are what did he call it? You can derive other categories from these, but they're derivative. They're not the primary. So it's those 12 are the categories, but then you can derive these others from them.
Yeah, in the Geyer and Wood translation, he calls them ancestral concepts. And then there's the derivative concepts, which can still be pure or non-empirical. So, yep.
Yeah, he mentions a couple of examples when he was talking about how they can inform a science. Like he related causality, I think, to force, was it? Or maybe it wasn't causality, but something he mentioned force and these kind of things you get in physics that like Chase was saying, I guess he would say they're a priori, but you derive them from these original concepts. I mean, when I said that, I had a bit of a flashback and what's it called when you have a bad trip? Anyway, a little flashback to Hegel and the phenomenology talking about force and me having no idea what the hell he was talking about. But
Yeah, no, a lot of that section, force and the understanding, is these first two moments in the category of relationality. Substance and accident, and then cause and effect. And the understanding. He's talking, I mean, Hegel is kind of laying out how we understand things as substances with accidents and this inherent force, right? Out of the sense certainty. And it's like, again, you might see a parallel where sense certainty is kind of quantities and qualities of things. Force and understanding starts to take into account the relationality and modality of things. Or at least relationality.
I mean, isn't the phenomenology kind of a journey from a certain limited singular judgment to a kind of universal, concrete universal knowledge? I think you could see how Hegel is doing he's working with Kant's categories here, but just in a very different dynamic.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe we can take a week to just read the phenomenology again too. Just real quick.
You need a whole week?
I mean, I'm busy. I've got this garden. I got a cat. I need to write my thesis. So yeah, probably a week, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Hegel's so much easier than, let's say, Hume or something. So,
Probably.
so Keenan and Aiden, is this like boring old hat? Got this? Why are we talking about this shit again? Kind of.
I mean, honestly, I feel like there's things that people are pointing out that I'm not even sure if I noticed the first read through. It's been a while too, so I mean, I'm kind of having to refresh myself.
It does get easier after multiple readings. Just so you know, like on the 7th pass, it'll be a lot easier, guys.
Oh, good.
Hunter would probably say the same thing about phenomenology. It's just that that was such a painful experience.
That was a thick jungle of words, wasn't it? Sometimes had to get out your machete.
Yeah, I mean, in general, if I feel like I'm reading something and I'm understanding some part of it, some significant part of it, I can sustain the interest and the energy. So like there's a lot of stuff in this book I'm not understanding, but I feel like I'm understanding significant parts of it. And so that kind of gets me through the parts I don't understand. But if I just go through, tens of pages and feel like I'm not understanding anything, I mean, it's just so emotionally and intellectually exhausting that it just becomes difficult, really difficult to keep it up.
Yeah, I feel like with this, I'm getting uh chunks of it is comprehensible. And I feel like I have a very, even though it's vague and fuzzy, but I have like an outline of like the whole system and project that's going on that definitely needs the detail needs to be kind of filled in, but it definitely helps to at least have that, like a vague outline, also an ability to kind of grasp these really detail-oriented things that he's talking about too. But then there's also, yeah, there's so much in here that I'm just like, what this it's so oh, I don't know. Kant's writing used to like really bother me. I feel like it's a little more digestible now, but still at times I'm just like, oh my God, so turgid and he's trying to be very exact and very meticulous, which I appreciate, but then at times I'm just like, oh my God, this sentence is ugh.
I always have to chuckle because, like, you're a Deleuzian, Hunter's a Hegelian, I'm in the Wittgensteinian camp, Nevitz a Nietzschean, and then you have Eric, who's like an Adorno fan, Hegelian Kantian, and we're all complaining about each other's like favorite philosopher being esoteric and difficult to read. Meanwhile, I'm like, they're all there in different ways.
I agree with that. Yeah. In different ways, Hegel's difficulty is quite different from Kant. At least it seems to me that way.
Yeah, me too.
Oh yeah.
Which is also different from Deleuze's difficulty. They're very different. Kant and Deleuze are their styles are very different.
I tell you what, one thing that helps me is if when you guys who are more familiar with this stuff clear out some of the terminology. So for example, earlier, just like at the very beginning, we were talking about universal, particular, and singular. I had a completely wrong idea of what particular meant. And when Chase explained about what that, that it meant some, and then explained that because it's like partitive, so particular has to do with that was super helpful. Or like when Eric was talking about problematic and what problematic meant, so this technical vocabulary is so precise, and these words, I don't know. I mean, my guess is in general, Kant's using these words consistently with the tradition, whereas, some philosophers there are other philosophers who are sort of, twisting and torquing the vocabulary, and then you have to somehow figure that out. But that still nevertheless, some of this vocabulary is different from my everyday usage of it. So when I hear the word particular, I hear one thing, and then Chase says, no, but this is what it means. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes a whole lot more sense. So I don't know, those of you who've read it, you don't even notice that anymore because you just, you're used to hearing it, you know what that word means, and you move on. But if you guys, if some of this vocabulary comes up and you can see that some of us are misunderstanding it, it's really helpful if you do that, speak up and say, well, what he means here is this.
Yeah, I would be lost without the Socratic idea forming these groups. Sometimes I get it slightly right, other times it's like, no.
I mean, I never heard the word apodictic before I read Kant.
Same.
So that one, I think I know what that meant because I had to look the word up, and the only place I have ever seen it is in Kant. But words like particular, I mean, you use that all the time. And
So that word is highlighted, apodictic is highlighted in the episode of Doug, where Doug reads the Critique of Pure Reason. There's like Skeeter ends up being a genius, and he's reading the Critique of Pure Reason, and so Doug tries to read it, and he's just like apodictic, and he looks it up in the dictionary and everything. Yeah. So we should probably watch that whole episode. I think that would help.
I think so. My first dog was named Pork Chop Chase, so I'm with you.
That's by the way, that whole terminology, problematic, esoteric, and apodictic is gonna show up in a lot of Kant's other work too.
yeah, I think I ran into apodictic, in the groundwork. So
That's
that's
right.
the first place I ran into it.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, we ran the clock out. Any last comments, questions?
Everybody get their questions answered?
Oh yeah, I completely, I got this. Thank you.
There's more to come. I mean, we're not going to have a full comprehensive picture yet, right? He's building up this side of the logic. So perhaps things will make more sense as more materials come into the picture, or not, but we'll see, right? But if you're still feeling like confused or that there are gaps in your understanding, that's as it should be because we've only just started the transcendental logic and there's quite a lot more to go.
Well, yeah, the book is over 700 pages long, and I'm not counting the bibliography and other things.
I just don't have a proper understanding of the synthetic aspect structurally of the categories to lead to understanding yet, but I'll get there.
I'll be honest, there's sometimes when I read through parts and I'm just like, man, I hope I don't really need to understand this. Like
No,
especially when
it-
he's responding, you know, well, the ancient said this and that. I'm like, oh my God, I hope this isn't important because I don't really understand what he's talking about here.
I also genuinely feel like I got spoiled with Gadamer because like he was just such a
Yeah.
good writer. Not that Kant isn't, it's just like for me, each philosopher is its own challenge to understand the thought system they're presenting because like I try to go into it with as much impartial agency as I can, even though I'm not sure if that's fully possible, and then just see what thought system they're forming and then add notes and then build up from there. So it will take time for me. I'm certainly not there yet.
Okay.
This is helpful, so thank you. See you next week.
Oh, we got Doug's critique of pure reason. Okay. Okay. See you guys.
Bye.
I'll be safe.
Notes.